I'm Nimmy.
And I'm Hrutu. From Adventurise, this is Venturing Beyond,
a podcast where we delve into the career stories of ambitious individuals.
Today we have with us Mikki Gates, who in a way has portfolio of a career. She is an artist, an entrepreneur who has founded a management consulting firm called Pikes Peak. She has worked in human resources for quite a lot of years. So that's something we'll be going in a little bit of depth as we go further into this conversation. She is a survivor speaker. She has battled a couple life-threatening illnesses and now has made it a point to go out there and publicly talk about and have honest conversations about what her experience has been like and everything around wellness. And currently, she is a curator of TEDxManitouSprings. So, welcome, Mikki, to the podcast. I'm really excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here as well.
So, Mikki, as I was reading up a little bit about you and everything that you have been posting on LinkedIn and on your social medias, I came across a really interesting post of yours from a little while ago where you spoke about how usually when people are asked this thing about tell me about yourself, right? A lot of times we tend to talk about what we have done and everything that, that we've been able to accomplish as opposed to who we actually are. And I found that really interesting because a lot of times, whether you are in job interviews or meeting someone new, that's the first thing that comes up, right? You just start talking about the first thing you talk about is what you do professionally. So I kind of wanted to start this conversation by asking you to tell me a little bit about yourself and what do you mean by actually defining yourself by who you are?
Yeah, thank you for that. It is such a valuable question. And as somebody who has interviewed people for almost 20 years now, you're right. That's exactly what people do. You ask them to tell you about themselves and they immediately dive into their previous careers and what their job titles have been, but they don't really tell you anything about their characteristics. And I think it's just because we've been trained that who we are is what our job is. So for me, I'm funny. I'm somebody that I find a lot of humor and a lot of joy in life. I'm somebody who is extremely reliable. I do believe in doing everything with integrity and make sure that I'm not offending people, that I'm including people. I really am focused on creating inclusive environments as much as I possibly can. So I like doing things like going and playing outdoor laser tag. I am addicted to escape rooms, which is, I've done about 50 escape rooms. And then I'm also a really creative person. And so that's helped me connect with people more and come up with some really fun activities and ways to connect with people. And I'm a little bit silly.
That's a beautiful answer. I think it's like a whole 360-degree, perspective of what it might be like hanging out with you. I think one other thing about you is that you call yourself a world-class empathizer. And I got kind of curious about that because a lot of your conversations around that are also in the context of being in the workforce, right? So I'm wondering, is it something that you think is kind of lacking in the current workplace scenario? Or is it something that you think people aren't actively engaging in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think that we are, as a world and as a workforce, getting better, and we are putting more weight on emotional intelligence and the softer skills like empathy. For me personally, as a world-class empathizer, I think I've had a lot of experiences in my life that have set me up to look at other people and their perspectives. And so an example that I use when I'm training employees is about 16 years ago, my grandfather was passing away. He was in a hospice. We knew that soon he would die. And my mother called me while I was at work and told me that he had passed, but that my grandmother did not know. And so I needed to go and pick her up, let her know that her husband of almost 50 years had passed away, and then bring her to where he was. So as I get in my car, I'm crying and I'm emotional, and I'm typically a pretty good driver, but I'm pretty sure I ran a couple of red lights. I was probably not staying in the lanes because I was so emotional, and people were honking at me and upset with me. And at that moment, even as I was so upset about my grandfather, but I had this aha moment where I thought, oh my goodness, when I get upset, at other people who are driving and cutting me off, and who knows what happened to them. Maybe their grandfather just passed away. And so like I said, I think I've always been a natural empathizer. Even growing up, I was good at understanding other people's perspectives, but it was that moment that I really challenged myself to be that way in all areas. So even if somebody has failed, or I think about employees who maybe are late every single day, even in those situations, I still can have empathy. That does not mean that I don't hold them accountable. It just means that I can understand things from their perspective. And so I work hard on training people about empathy, because I think so many people in the workforce now tend to be a little bit more cynical.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting that you mentioned about, humanizing that connection as well, because that can get forgotten in terms of deadlines and things that are coming up and project that needs to be done ASAP. Like, you can forget that side as well. I'm a psychology major. I did a bunch of classes in like organizational behavior and that front of things. And one of the things I remember discussing in our class was how powerful being vulnerable to your colleagues can be. And it's not just about, telling your problems to them or just talking about things that you're emotional about, but it's also sort of about building that kind of trust and that kind of rapport with them, where you can be a human and you can talk about things that are outside of work that are affecting you. So being empathetic also goes back to other people, allowing other people to be vulnerable to us and opening up to us as well. It's something that can be learned, right? Like, you're working on training people on that. So to what extent do you think this is something that is a learnable trait, or is it just, an inherent part of your personality that you're probably born with and would be too hard to change? Like, what does that balance look like?
People are naturally born being empathetic or not being empathetic. And so that's why it's important to find people that balance you. In terms of training people, you might not be able to train them to automatically be empathetic, but what you can do, just like when you're training them how to use a computer, different types of skills, you can train them to stop whenever they start having a reaction that might be something that's more negative or assuming negative intent of an employee. You can train them to stop and question how they're reacting and say, am I actually thinking about this from the other person's perspective? Am I understanding what they're trying to say to me? Or am I just automatically making an assumption about their behavior and acting on that? And so while internally they might not have that empathy, they can still be a more empathetic leader by slowing down and asking those questions.
When we talk about personalities in general, right? And I asked this question to you specifically as an HR professional who's done this kind of work for multiple years. So when you talk about personalities, would you say that there's certain kind of personalities who are meant for certain kinds of works or job fields? Or is it something that you should not take into account? Because a lot of times conversations around the big 5 personality model and like the Myers-Briggs tests and sort of like trying to categorize ourselves based on those traits that, a piece of paper tells us, that's something that might or might not work, right? These kinds of tests, maybe covertly or overtly, are part of either interview processes or when people are trying to figure out if someone's a good add to a team or good fit for a particular kind of a role. As someone who's looking for a job or someone who's just figuring out what kind of industry I should go into or what kind of job would I be okay doing on an everyday basis, to what extent, in your experience, has personality been a hindrance or an accelerator to something that a person might or might not want to do in their professional lives?
I personally like personality tests, not necessarily as something that you wholly invest in. Like, you don't necessarily take a DISC assessment and say, okay, this is who I am, and this is how I'm going to communicate with other people, or Strength Finders or Myers-Briggs. But I do think that there's value in taking those assessments and even taking them within a group setting to where you can learn more about it and interact with people that have different strengths than you. Or if we're thinking about DISC in particular, I'm a high I. I with a high D and then some pretty moderate S and C, working with other people who are the opposite of me and kind of understanding how they work through those assessments has been something that's been really enlightening to me. And like I said, I don't invest everything into them. It's not something where I'm like, this is who I am, this is who I'm always going to be. But on the flip side, when I understand if I'm a high I and I'm working with somebody who's a high D, then I understand the way to communicate with them so that I'm getting through to them and speaking their language. For people that are entering the workforce or maybe applying for a job, I think it can be something that helps them understand what type of role would be best for them. Again, not something that they only go off of that, but something that just is a guide for them and helps them understand the types of roles that they might be really successful in.
So talking about introversion and extroversion specifically and that kind of spectrum, that cannot always be a one-off thing, right? Sometimes you're more extroverted than people around you. Sometimes you're more introverted than people around you. It really depends on the situation, because this has been my experience or the things that I've observed so far. When you are like an early in career employee or someone who's just out of college, networking in itself is emphasized a lot. You can go on job boards and apply for jobs online. You can reach out to people you already know and all of that kind of stuff. But every single webinar that I've been a part of, or every single person or like a career advisor I've spoken to, this has been like the top tip, right? Like you have to go out there, put yourself out there, you have to network and make your way through. And that generally is a pretty great advice, right? Because you get to learn more things outside of your immediate circle. You get to meet interesting people. You might be able to learn a few new things that you had probably never heard of before, but that cannot be everyone's cup of tea, right? And talking about personalities specifically, that's not generally a super sustainable way for someone who just doesn't like being around people a lot or finds their peace when they're alone. And not just before looking for jobs, right? Once you're in that sort of a corporate setting or in any kind of a workplace, once you're in there, networking is kind of a way to get promoted, to get your work noticed, to sort of, get along well with your colleagues, because that's also a really important part of being able to progress in what you're doing. So I think generally the way workplaces are curated or just how they function inherently are catered towards more outgoing people. Do you agree with that? And what's your opinion on it?
I think you're 100% correct. It's been that way probably, since the Industrial Revolution, that people that are more outgoing are more successful because they do get the opportunity to shine in front of the decision makers. And people that naturally network, of course, are going to have those connections and going to be able to open doors that other people won't. However, I do think that in the past probably 5 years or so, there has been a shift where people are being seen for things beyond being outspoken. But there are lots of other ways that people could be creative and reach out and network online, even through blogging, through sending notes to people. If they create creative content, they can send that out. If they have a few key people that they trust, those people could help them network as well. But then on the flip side, going back to the original about needing to be outspoken and cheerful and take initiative and how that can be exhausting for people. I think if the people that are that way, that tend to be more introverted, if they schedule the times that they're going to network and also schedule times for them to replenish, then that gives them kind of what they need. It's not necessarily fair that that's the way it is, but we're, we have a lot of time before we're going to get to the point where outspoken and outgoing people aren't the chosen ones.
So being able to strategize around what already your restrictions are. And I really like your point on finding different ways to put yourself out there. So whether it's writing a blog or like creating an Instagram page for your artwork or something like that.
Now we can do that. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that didn't exist. You had to go into work. You had to be on when you got there and be happy and pleasant. But nowadays, you could be behind a computer and not talk to a single person the entire day and still be super successful.
So kind of going to some questions about you and your HR journey and also your journey as an entrepreneur. I'd like to know a little bit about what your entire career journey has been like.
Absolutely. I started my people HR career when I joined a nonprofit school when I was about 20. I started as the office manager, and there were about 15 different employees and about 250 volunteers. And that was where I learned to be a really great multitasker, to wear about 30 different hats and to constantly switch gears. And I learned that I was really good at anticipating people's needs, to help them feel really excited about work that they were having to do. And I worked there for about 10 years, eventually changed from being the office manager to being the director of HR, and started learning more about the backside of the people industry. So labor law, benefits administration, all the things that aren't as romantic and fun as actually getting to connect with people and help them. And after I'd been there for about 10 years, it was time for me to move on and find something new. And so I actually jumped ship and went over to retail and ended up working at Sephora, and worked there for a long time as a store director, and eventually what's called a council store director, which meant that I got to go to the corporate office. And that is where I really started to understand what I loved specifically, which was creating and developing strategies that help people enjoy their job better. So when I found that niche, that's when I really started being more focused on what I wanted my career to be. And I then went to a talent management specialist position at a company called Corvertis that worked with companies all over the world, worked with the executive teams at each of these companies in developing their HR and operations strategies. So things from as simple as creating job descriptions all the way to creating entire performance management systems. And I loved it, loved it. But the environment was just a little bit too quiet for me. And that is when I decided to launch Pikes Peak and do similar things with local smaller companies in the hospitality, e-commerce industries, help them create policies and procedures, create handbooks, create employee engagement solutions, different things like that. Because what I found is a lot of those smaller companies, they just don't know how to do that. And so they know, let's say they're opening a restaurant, they know how to cook the food, they know how to serve the guests, but they don't necessarily know all those back-end HR and people operations frameworks. And from there, I got my license to curate TEDxManitouSprings, and we're currently working on curating our first event. We just selected our speakers. Right as COVID is finally slowly starting to trickle down, we're able to bring people back together to be inspired and really restore what our community had before the beginning of 2020.
That's a very exciting journey. And like the theme that I saw throughout was sort of like an impact on other people. So I think that's sort of being a driving force behind you making those decisions. But it also looks like you did spend several years in those specific roles that you did before sort of making your switch. So did you have any particular kind of realization when you were in those specific roles that, hey, this is the time to change, or, I've exactly found what I enjoy doing, so I'm going to go after it? Or did you just go with the flow?
A little bit of both. When I was at the nonprofit, I'd been there for about 10 years, basically all of my 20s I was there. And so that one was a transition that took me a couple of years to realize it was time to leave, just because that was kind of all I knew as an adult. But I was just ready to just expand my knowledge and have new exciting adventures. When I was at Sephora, actually, I probably would still be there, except for I got sick. I started getting sick in 2012 and did not know what was wrong with me. I thought I had asthma. I went to the doctor over and over, and they misdiagnosed me as having asthma. And then in 2016, while I was at work, while I was at Sephora, I had a stroke while I was talking to an employee, ended up being rushed to the hospital and had dozens of tests. And they found a large tumor inside my heart called a myxoma. So I had to have emergency open heart surgery the next day. And then I had a pacemaker implanted about 4 days after that. I went back to work 3.5 weeks after having open heart surgery. So at the time, I was really proud of myself. It was like, look at me, I'm coming back to work and I'm here with my team and it's great. And I actually worked at Sephora for about another 1.5 years. I got a promotion. I was driving to Denver back and forth every day. And about a year and a half after returning to work, I started reflecting on the fact that I had not taken the time I needed to heal. And I don't mean heal physically. I was going through what I needed to physically, but I hadn't really accepted that I'd been through something so traumatic and hadn't given myself the opportunity to heal emotionally. And so that I really had an aha moment. I actually went to Australia and got married. And while I was in Australia and I was having this chance to reflect, I thought, I love my job, but at the same time, I haven't processed what I need to process. And therefore, I'm not giving 100% to my job, and I'm not able to give 100% to my family or to myself as well. And so when I was in Australia and just enjoying myself, I started thinking about the things that I loved at Sephora, but also the things that I was spending so much time on, like being in the car or focusing on loss prevention or focusing on merchandising, when my passion was really people and really inspiring people and motivating people and helping them grow and into their careers that they didn't, see potential that they didn't even necessarily see that they had. And so when I got back from Sephora, that's when I put in my notice and decided that I needed to find work doing something that was really specific to those things that I was so passionate about. And like I said, I loved Sephora. I probably would still be there if I had not gotten sick, because it was a really great job and I had a lot of fun. But in terms of career satisfaction, as I processed when I left Sephora and started thinking through, okay, this is what I want to do and this is the impact I want to make, that was where the career satisfaction piece came in. Of I refuse to work anywhere where I don't feel like I'm making a difference and where I don't have some flexibility and autonomy to do what I know is right based on my experience and just based on on my knowledge. And so it definitely is something that has guided me since I left Sephora in working at Corvertis and learning so much that I did there, working with these companies all over the world, and then founding Launch Pikes Peak and curating TEDx. Every day that I work, even if I'm exhausted, I go to bed with that sense of satisfaction because I know that I'm making a difference. I know that I'm inspiring people. And I know that I'm helping create leaders or empower leaders of tomorrow. So yeah, absolutely. That was something that changed the way I think about where I work and how I work.
It's amazing that you just said that you go to bed thinking that you make a difference and then you're satisfied with what you do. And I can imagine it's a great feeling to have. And that's something I've personally been sort of struggling with as well, as I'm just starting out my professional journey, trying to figure out what I really enjoy, what I would like to do several hours a day and still be able to do it for many, many years to go, right? And of course, the interests might change and things that I'm passionate about might change over time, but there's still some essence to what a general satisfactory professional life could look like. And that's something that a lot of people do struggle with in their early years. Like you seem to have found, hey, like I like making an impact and I like making a difference in other people's life quite early on. So you're able to make those decisions accordingly. But a lot of people just simply don't have that, including myself. So if you had to give certain tips to people still exploring what they're doing or sort of navigating their journey through figuring out what they enjoy, what they're passionate about, or just simply what they would like to do for the long term, what would your tips be for that?
I think I would say that to not think that whatever decision you make has to be the decision you've made for your entire life. So back when my grandmother was working, I think her entire career, she worked, 40, 45 years. She only worked 2 jobs her entire career. Back then, you did not change careers. You got your job, you stayed there no matter how much you hated it, no matter how you were treated. Whereas now we really do have a lot of flexibility, not only changing jobs within the same career, but at any point stopping and thinking, is this actually what I want to do now that I've learned and now that I've experienced this? The other piece of advice was, just because you're doing one thing doesn't mean you can't do 2 things. And so for me, TEDx is completely volunteer. I have a regular, 45 an hour a week job that I do where I work with people and build culture, but then I also have TEDx. And so have multiple passions at the same time while you're trying to figure it out. I don't think I'll ever, and probably until the day that I die, I won't ever only be working on one project. And that I think is probably why I do go to sleep feeling successful, because some days I put my all into TEDx. Other days I might spend half the day painting. Other days I might have just gone to a couple of escape rooms with my daughter. So yeah, those are my two pieces of advice. You are not stuck, so don't be afraid to take chances. And if you change in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, go for it. It's never too late. And then do multiple things. Don't think that you only have time for one thing. If you are passionate about things, you can make time for them.
Flexibility is like the biggest
Absolutely.
takeaway from that. So how would you say your networking process looked like? Was it something that you actively did? And how did that look like during your early years of career?
You know what's funny is that I seem like a people person and I am people focused, but I'm actually an extroverted introvert. So when I'm connecting with people, I'm very extroverted. If I'm at a party, I can talk with everybody. But the way that I recharge is going home and reading a book or being with my family, which I think helps me quite a bit because then I do understand the perspective of the full introverts that way. When I started my career, I don't think I really even acknowledged the power of networking. It was something that I was fortunate enough to just have naturally happen because I was working with so many volunteers. And so many of them were people that owned businesses in my community. So I had that natural connection. But after I'd been in the workforce for about 10 years or so, so once I left the nonprofit, I did actively network. As soon as LinkedIn started, I started being very active on LinkedIn and reaching out and connecting to people in an authentic way. So even responding up to posts, reaching out and figuring out ways to connect with people, whether that was through virtual coffee or in-person coffee. And then as I started being more of a community leader, so working with different TEDx's and working with the American Heart Association and Higher Heroes and things like that, I networked with leaders in those different organizations. And now it's become something that's just very natural for me. I try to go and support several different nonprofits, like like I said, American Heart Association, American Stroke Association, working with Care and Share, which is a food bank in Colorado. There's the Women's Resource Agency where I go in and help mentor women revising their resumes and applying for jobs and things like that. And so that's a little bit more active and a little bit more focused networking, but it's a networking with a purpose. And so I'm giving back to the community and volunteering and supporting, but also meeting really great people along the way. And I really do think that because of that networking, that's how I was able to bring on such incredible people to TEDxManitouSprings when I got the license. I had already built these really strong relationships, and the people that I was working with knew that I would not create something that wasn't going to be awesome. And so they wanted to join. And all of that is because I put the effort in really specific ways, working on events for the community that give back, that really give to the greater good.
Yeah, and it does look like this kind of networking is not always keeping in mind that I'm going to need something in return later on, maybe when you got there for job search, right? And the first step that's given to you is you should network to be able to get the job. So the very first reaction to that always is, I got to reach out to people on LinkedIn and maybe do an informational interview or ask them about their job, only so that I could get to a point where I could ask for a referral,
Right.
or only so that I could get to a point where they could tell me about an opening in their company. And as much as that might turn out to be helpful to some, it's still something that feels not as authentic to a certain extent, because you're going in there with an intention. So a lot of times it's just about getting something in return from that. So unless you are networking for quite a long time,
Right.
or doing multiple things just out of your curiosity to learn more about other people, or just to be friends with them, or just to learn more about what they're doing, it can come off as something that's just being done for the sake of doing it. And I think in my experience, at least, that's something that's not mentioned a lot. When you talk about networking, it's almost always so that you can get a job, or
Right.
you can get that next opportunity. And that's how a lot of us usually approach it as well, because that's what's told to you, right?
And I think you're so spot on with that, because if there's a job that's listed and you just reach out as soon as that job is listed to network with people, you just can imagine how many other people are doing the same thing. So how many messages are they getting in their inbox from people that want to network with them but really want to get that job? And so trying to think ahead, trying to think, okay, when I'm ready to enter the workforce, I'm ready to switch jobs. What type of company do I want to work for? There's no reason that you can't be a little bit more strategic about it, but think more in the long term. Okay, 6 months or a year from now, I might be ready to move. So I'm going to connect with people who work in this industry or work at this company and see if I can start creating relationships, even if it's just online, even if it's just commenting on their content, but for a length of time. That's going to make it more authentic. And then you actually will have just naturally networked with them, and maybe you'll end up getting the job or not. But either way, you'll have a great connection with somebody.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's a process and definitely something you need to spend long enough time doing, because that, like, yeah, networking is something you can't get like immediate results from. So yeah, patience is also super important in this case. So going off that, what would your some of the top tips be for someone who's just starting out, generally in their professional journeys, or just trying to look for their very first opportunity after they're graduating?
I would say don't take the first job that's offered to you unless you've actually researched and found that it's the company you want to work for. I think that we get so excited that somebody wants us and that, you know, we've been accepted, that sometimes we don't do the research on our end. Right now, and probably for the next couple of years, if you think about when we talk about the house selling market, that it's a buyer's market and a seller's market, right now it's the candidates market. So right now the candidates, because there's so many jobs that are open, the candidates can actually do some research and slow down and make sure that they're working for a company that's going to give them what they promise. So often there are values that are written on a wall or in a handbook, but it's not actually what the company lives and breathes every day. So yeah, so my first tip would be slow down. I know that you want to get a job, and I know that you want to get a paycheck and you want to get to work, but you don't want to jump into something that isn't going to be a good fit for you. The second would be exactly kind of what we're talking about now, to think about the things that you're passionate about and start researching and finding companies that fit that passion rather than looking for a job title that fits what you want. If you want to work for, I'm just going to throw out Google. If you want to work for Google, there are how many thousand different types of jobs that maybe even have job titles that you never considered. So to be a little bit creative and to be flexible. And then I think the third one would be to take initiative once you get hired. The people that I see that have been really successful and grown their careers are people that step up, that ask questions, that offer to help. That's what leaders want. They want somebody who comes in. That doesn't mean that you have to come in every day and pretend that everything's perfect and not be your authentic self, but to be a problem solver rather than a problem maker, and come in, take initiative, and help to improve yourself or your team or your organization, whatever your role is, to take that initiative.
Right, absolutely. That kind of reminds me of this time when in my very recent internship that I did, and so when you are someone who obviously has like least amount of experience compared to others in the room as a new employee, it's always intimidating, and also to a certain extent you just feel like you don't know enough about the industry or enough about how the company functions. And you sort of like get into the process of doing things how they're already done and just following that. And like my very first day of that internship, I was given a binder and it was like, oh, this is what the previous interns did. So you kind of follow these instructions, and you get, of course, like open to making changes or, the way you want to do it. But this is how it's usually being done. And as someone who had absolutely zero idea about how the processes work, that was like the immediate first step I took. And a couple of weeks in, as I just like mindlessly was following those instructions, I was like, this absolutely makes no sense why you have to do these 3 things. Why can't I just put then a formula in Excel and create a report? It's going to save me 10 minutes every day. And that's going to be, like and aggregate a lot more time. I could probably, save a lot of time, probably work on something else, or just go home early, right? If nothing needs to be done, why do I have to follow these rules? And I go up to my manager and I was like, hey, is it okay if I make some changes? Obviously, the end result is always going to be the same. It's going to change the back end process from my end. And she was like, yeah, as long as the work is being done, no one really cares, right? It was a 6 month a long internship that I did. And at the end, I did not even realize it was that big a deal. But as I was leaving and they hadn't hired the next intern, and I was just sitting with my manager and telling her, how is it that I did the whole process? And she was like, we had never thought of this before, because everyone who had done this before you, they were all interns and they had followed this process, and it had never come up to the management team that this could be an issue, that it was an extremely inefficient process to follow, right? And it was only then when I was leaving and someone else had to take over that they realized that it was a huge save of time, and also reducing errors, because you're automating kind of the formulas on Excel and didn't have to do it manually. So yeah, definitely something that as a new employee you'd find intimidating, or feel like you are doing more than you're asked to, and that's not your place to speak up. But a lot of times others on the team just simply don't think about that because they have so many other things going on. So I definitely agree with the point that taking initiative is important, as long as you're being respectful and putting your point forward, communicating everything well. That's something that almost always works out if you're in a healthy environment where your opinions are being considered.
Yeah. And I think you're so spot on that a lot of the time, so this manager, this leader that you talked to, she might have never done the role that you were doing and that the interns were doing. So she didn't even know how inefficient it was. And so for you to have spoken up and asked, can I do this? It'll give you the same result. What is awesome. And I say that to so many of my employees all the time. Like, I have 150 of you. So please come to me if you have ideas or suggestions for improvements, because it's not that I don't value each one of you, but I just don't have the time to understand everything that you do in your role. So if you see a way for improvement that's going to make things more efficient or going to give us better customer satisfaction or whatever it might be, please tell me about it and let's see if we can do it. We get so trapped in this is the way we do things because this is the way they've always been done. We need to break out of that. We need to really inspire people to think outside of the box and create change. And then those people that have been stuck in that mindset, we slowly have to work on giving them that growth mindset and help them understand that change is not always a bad thing. It's actually a really good thing.
Yeah, especially in smaller firms where, one person's doing multiple things. It's just always easy to find out the best possible way of doing something that saves everyone time and money, obviously.
Yes. Yeah.
So changing gears towards your entrepreneurial journey, right? So I'm kind of curious to know more about what is it that made you realize that, this is something that you'd want to do, and what was your motivation behind venturing into it? And I asked this specifically because so as we are starting this mentorship platform, right, this is the question Nimmy and I keep asking us a lot about. What's our ultimate motive behind doing this, right? Like, of course, the purpose is something that we're closely aligned with, a problem that we have personally faced and we kind of want to solve it. But is it sustainable in the long run to just have that motivation and keep continuing doing something? Because obviously entrepreneurship is something that is not like an overnight thing. You have to keep doing something for a really long time to even understand if it's viable enough, it's something that's going to make you money, if it's something that's going to grow. And that particular motive behind doing something can help you get that push and keep going even when things aren't working well. So as someone who's been doing it for a couple of years now, what are your thoughts on passion for solving the problem, or like the motivation behind wanting to be an entrepreneur? Or is it something you just want to do because it seems fun? Does it have to be deep?
Yeah. I went into it. I had some partners that I had been working with on some other smaller projects, and we had talked about it for years that we felt like as a smaller firm, as a smaller company, we could provide this higher level of service, but not charge the same amount that some of these bigger firms were charging. And so when we went into it, we knew that it would be a long time before we really made any profit. And I think that actually helped us, because we weren't going into it thinking, oh, I'm going to start my own business and then I'm going to be able to take a few months of vacation off a year and I'm going to make so much money. We really went into it thinking of it almost as a nonprofit, where we'd be helping these businesses in our community that wouldn't be able to afford support if they weren't working with a small company. And I think the reason that we were excited about it is that we had a couple of HR and operations experts, as well as a graphic design expert. And we all had been working since we were teenagers. And we had learned how to treat people really well and how to really provide great products and great solutions, all of us coming from different industries. And so when we started meeting and talking about it, it just was something that I think all at the same time thought, why are we not doing this? This is something we have to do. And what's really funny, it was very coincidental, probably 4 days after we had this meeting where we decided, okay, we're actually going to create this and we're going to make this happen. I had somebody reach out to me that I'd worked with on another project that said, hey, I have somebody in California that needs help writing job descriptions and creating interview guides. Did you ever think about doing that for contract work as well? And so at that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, this is meant to be. This is exactly what we've been talking about this entire time. So it's kind of both. It's kind of, hey, we thought this would be fun and we think it would be really great to work together. But then on the flip side, I wanted to provide something that was affordable and that gave people long-term success, specifically in the hospitality industry, because the fail rate for restaurants is so high. And I think often it's because people go into it without understanding all of that backside of things, like that we talked about before, creating those HR frameworks, creating things like performance management systems, creating succession planning, figuring out ways to keep your employees engaged. And so, yes, they serve great food. Yes, they serve great drinks. Yes, their customer service is great. But if your employees aren't well taken care of, and if they're not giving those basic needs that employees need, then you're going to fail. And so by being able to give almost that gift to these smaller businesses was something that helped me. Like we talked about, I go to bed and I feel satisfied and I feel like I'm actually making a difference through that. We still don't make a lot of money, but I don't think that's why we didn't start it to be something where we made a lot of money. COVID hit, of course, and it hit the hospitality industry the hardest, which is where TEDx kind of came into play for me, because it allows me to do all of those things that I'm doing with Launch Pikes Peak, but do it specifically as a nonprofit and specifically for the community. And as the businesses start coming back and ready to start rebuilding their frameworks and things like that through Launch Pikes Peak, then we'll refocus on that again. So flexibility, I know you didn't ask that, but even as an entrepreneur, knowing that 1 month you might have a ton of business and then COVID might hit and then you might not have any business for a while, being flexible and being smart enough to prepare ahead for things like that is something that has kept us going.
Mm-hmm. I think going back to the little talk we had about, personality traits and those relating to your profession, is there anything particular about your personality or something that's unique to you that you think has helped you to get where you are today?
Yes. Yeah, I do think I've been really lucky. If you think about strength finders, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but with strength finders, my number 1 is strategy and my number 2 is achiever. So those two things combined, it makes perfect sense to me, because everything I do, it's almost like a puzzle. That's probably why I love escape rooms so much, that everything I do, it's strategic, and I'm constantly working to do more both for myself and for other people. And so I think that really has helped me. But also in Strength Finders, I also have Woo, which is, connecting with people and almost even charming people a little bit. And so I've been very lucky that I have that strategy, but then I also have that other side side to me where I can connect with people. So they see that I drive results, but they also kind of are rooting for me. And then with the disc profiling, even though I'm a high I, I'm actually pretty steady. My eyes like a little bit up, but the rest of them are pretty steady. And so I think I've been fortunate because then I can relate to people better. I understand each of the other, the high D, the high S, and the high C. I can relate to them a little bit more. So definitely those have helped me. Yeah.
That's such a strategic answer as well.
I know. I'm strategy, but yeah, all the time, my brain is just fitting things into place. It's like a puzzle or like Tetris.
It's beautiful. It's like problem solving through life in
Yes,
everything.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious. You've mentioned that a lot of things that you've done in your life through your professional journey sort of like fell into place in a way that made you a little more aware of what you wanted to do next. But on the flip side, are there any things that you probably regret or the decisions you took that did not go well? And if so, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was at the nonprofit, I probably stayed a couple of years longer than I should have, just because I knew that I knew, or probably when I was in my 7th or 8th year, I was there for 10 years. I knew that I was ready to move on, but because I had learned so much and had almost grown up there, I felt like I owed something to them. Like I didn't deserve to step out and do something new because I had grown in my career and I had learned so much. And so looking back, I wish I had learned sooner that it's okay to say goodbye to a job. You still love the people that work there. You still respect them, but you don't owe a company anything.
I wanted to understand your perspective on generally working in human resources. And for someone who's probably just starting out or maybe figuring out if there's something they want to do in the human resources space, things like, talent acquisition or, recruiting and all those kinds of things are like seen a lot and a lot of people know about it, but there's a lot more to it that just isn't spoken about enough. If there's someone who's just wanting to start out in this space, how would you describe human resources in general? And yeah, so, and if there's anything specific you would want to tell people about that's not being spoken enough, what would it be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yes, a lot of it is talent acquisition and recruiting, but also creating the solutions so that you're finding the right people. And that's a really fun part of human resources, or I don't really love the title human resources because I think it just gives this negative connotation that that's where people go to get in trouble. So I like to think of it as like people and culture, right? We take care of our people and we help build our culture. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that probably at least 50% of our jobs is listening to people, is whether that's walking around and just taking those couple of minutes to touch base with people, or hearing whatever it is that's bothering people, or even if that's like conflict resolution, things like that. And that it's very lonely. When you're human resources or your people and culture, you have the responsibility to keep things confidential. And that's even from your management team. So it can be very lonely. I have a really good example in 2020 where the company where I currently am right now, we lost 4 employees within a matter of 3 months that passed away. None of them were from COVID. They were all from different illnesses. But several of them I knew ahead of time because I connected with their significant others that they were passing, and they did not want people at the company to know. And so I had to carry that burden and not share it with anybody because it's my legal responsibility to keep things confidential. And listen, as I talked to them, as I talked to their spouses, and then communicate that with the rest of the company. It's lonely and it's hard. I think that's something that people need to go into it to make sure that they understand that you have a lot of exciting things that you can do by building things for employee engagement and team building and employee development and leadership development and things like that. But there also is an emotional aspect of it. So to make sure you have a support network in place. So for me, that's connecting with other HR professionals that either work side by side with me, or for me, I have my sister and my husband that I can connect with because I legally cannot say something here. And then the other piece is that there's a lot of paperwork. And so even though the people that work in HR should be people, there's also a ton of paperwork when it comes to things like benefits administration and filing all of the different things that you have to with the government, and really understanding labor law so that you don't do something that's illegal or don't say something that you should never say, understanding those pieces of it.
So since you mentioned certifications and sort of things that you learned, so are there any recommendations or things that are like good to have for someone who wants to venture into this?
Yeah, absolutely. There are two different ones. There's the professional and human resources certification that people can get. And then there's also a great one through SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resource Management. They have a couple of different certifications. There's a CP that's a certified professional. Then there's an SCP, which is a senior certified professional. And then they actually just recently introduced a global, so a GSP for people that really take on global aspects of human resource management, because that's so different, right, than US law or specific countries. It's knowing all of them.
Also, do you know if these certifications are recognized only in the US or outside as well?
Actually, I don't. That's a really good question. They do have the global certification professional for SHRM, but I don't know if that's a good question. I'll have to find that out. And then on top of those certifications, there's a lot of ones that you can get through places like SHRM and PHR, and even different colleges will have certifications that you can take online that are specifically for things that are really important right now, like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and employee engagement. You can get specific certifications. So if you want to be an HR professional or a people and culture leader, and you really want your focus to be on something like inclusion or diversity, you can get your SHRM or your SPHR, and then you also can get an additional certification for those specific things. And those are what companies are really looking for now. They value college education, but then they also value those certifications on top of that.
If you have any specific book recommendations or social media handles or anything and everything you follow in terms of educational content that you really resonate with, that helps you a lot. It can be related to your profession or even otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. Where I go, there's a couple of places that I go to continue my HR education. It's funny enough, because I am a curator for TEDx, but I watch a ton of TED Talks and a ton of TEDx Talks. Pretty much any topic that you're wanting to learn more about or feel inspired about, or you just are interested in, there's a TED Talk or a TEDx Talk about it. If I'm looking for something that's more specific, that's when I go to SHRM. But they also have different articles and forums that you can join. So if you have a question that's really specific about a circumstance that you're dealing with day to day, you can ask a question, or you can find a thread that's already been created and do that. Books that I love, there's a couple. I just finished one by Heather Younger. It's called The Art of Caring Leadership. And I think it's so on point for where we are today, that we need to care for our employees and think about our employees' well-being as we make decisions for them. And it goes on, my whole journey of being an empathetic leader. And then I've always loved Simon Sinek's Start With Why. I used to show, actually I probably should start showing it again, but I used to show his TED Talk, The Golden Circle, that breaks down how you build loyalty is by starting with why versus starting with what. And I've used that with leadership teams and trainings for years now. And I think it really resonates with people because it really does. It helps you slow down and step back, like we talked about through this entire conversation. If you ask yourself why before you jump into anything, or before you speak to somebody, or before you make a decision, then you can be sure that you're leading with intent and making better decisions for yourself and what your purpose is. Yeah, so Heather Younger, The Art of Caring Leadership, and then Simon Sinek, Start With Why, are two books that I would highly recommend. And neither one of them is that long. They're really easy reads, but they make a really powerful, give you a really powerful end result and something that you carry with you.